Elizabeth Taylor revealed the 6 women she had an affair with. Elizabeth Taylor lived her life like one of her epic films, grand, passionate, and filled with dramatic twists that kept the world captivated for decades. The violet-eyed beauty who married 8 times to 7 different men cultivated an image as Hollywood's ultimate seductress of men, from her scandalous affair with Eddie Fisher to her tempestuous relationships with Richard Burton. But behind this carefully crafted public narrative lay a more complex truth about Taylor's intimate life, one that Hollywood publicists, studio executives, and Taylor herself kept carefully hidden from public view for most of her career. As the years have passed since her death in 2011, biographers, historians, and those who knew her personally have begun revealing a more complete picture of Taylor's romantic history, one that includes significant relationships with women as well as men. Elizabeth was far more complicated than the man-hungry screen siren the studios marketed, revealed a former MGM publicist who worked closely with Taylor during her peak years. Her appetites for love, for connection, for passion, couldn't be confined to the narrow boundaries of what was considered acceptable for a female star in that era. This more nuanced understanding of Taylor's sexuality has emerged through decades of research, confidential interviews with those in her inner circle, and the gradual relaxation of the ironclad secrecy that once governed Hollywood's treatment of its stars' private lives. What has become increasingly clear is that Taylor's romantic history included significant relationships with women, connections that ranged from brief, passionate encounters to deeper emotional attachments. Elizabeth didn't see love in terms of categories or labels, explained a close friend who knew Taylor for over 4 decades. She fell in love with people who intrigued her, who matched her intensity, who weren't afraid of her power. Sometimes those people were men, sometimes they weren't. Today, we explore the most significant of these relationships. 6 women who shared private intimacy with one of Hollywood's most public figures, illuminating a side of Elizabeth Taylor that adds new dimensions to our understanding of a woman who, even in death, continues to fascinate us with her complexity, her contradictions, and her refusal to live by anyone's rules but her own. Elizabeth Taylor's relationships with women reveal far more than just additional chapters in her romantic history. They provide crucial insight into the extraordinary complexity of a woman who lived her life on a grand scale while navigating the oppressive restrictions of her era. In a Hollywood where even a hint of same-sex attraction could end careers instantly, Taylor's private exploration of relationships with women represented not just personal desire, but a form of rebellion against the constraints placed on female stars. These relationships, long hidden behind carefully constructed public narratives about her marriages and affairs with famous men, offer a more complete portrait of a woman whose appetites for love, for experience, for authentic connection were as outsized as her legendary beauty and talent.
There'll be no Thursday for us, next week or any other week. I won't let it happen. I'll tear it out of the calendar.
The enigmatic connection, Greta Garbo. Of all Elizabeth Taylor's alleged relationships with women, perhaps none has intrigued Hollywood historians more than her rumored affair with the notoriously private Greta Garbo. These 2 icons of different Hollywood eras, Garbo the mysterious Swedish siren of the 1930s, Taylor the violet-eyed beauty of the 1950s, seem at first glance unlikely companions. Yet according to multiple biographers and industry insiders, their paths crossed in the early 1950s, leading to a brief but intense connection. She wanted mystery. Elizabeth wanted danger. They gave each other both, explained film historian Margaret Collins, who has spent decades researching Hollywood's hidden LGBTQ history. Garbo was the ultimate enigma, someone who had walked away from fame at its peak. For a young Elizabeth Taylor, still very much under the thumb of the studio system, Garbo represented a kind of freedom she hadn't yet experienced herself. By the time they allegedly met in 1953, Garbo was in her late 40s and had been living in self-imposed retirement for over a decade. Taylor, barely in her 20s, was at the height of her MGM stardom, but increasingly frustrated by the studio's control over her image and personal life. According to those familiar with their relationship, the 2 women were introduced at a small private gathering at the home of director George Cukor, known for hosting discreet social events where Hollywood's closeted stars could relax away from public scrutiny. Cukor's Sunday afternoons were legendary in certain circles, noted Collins. For someone like Garbo, who guarded her privacy fiercely, these gatherings were rare occasions where she felt comfortable. For Taylor, they offered glimpses of a more authentic Hollywood than the one MGM presented to the public. What reportedly began as mutual curiosity developed into something deeper. According to multiple sources, Taylor and Garbo were seen alone together at several private retreats in the months following their initial meeting. A former caretaker at an estate in Ojai, California, claimed that the two women spent a week there in the summer of 1953, requesting absolute privacy. Garbo was reclusive, private, and long rumored to prefer women, said Collins. What made the connection with Taylor different was the contrast between them. Garbo's Nordic reserve versus Elizabeth's passionate temperament, the fading legend, and the ascendant star. What drew these seemingly opposite women together? According to those who knew them, part of the attraction lay in their shared experience of being objectified by the Hollywood machine, Garbo having escaped it, Taylor still struggling within its constraints. They were both women whose physical beauty had been commodified by studios from a very young age, explained biographer Patricia Morrison. Both understood the strange experience of being treated as visual property rather than complex human beings. The alleged affair was reportedly brief but significant for both women. For Garbo, it represented a rare moment of connection after years of self-imposed isolation. For Taylor, it offered a glimpse of possibilities beyond the conventional relationships the studios had orchestrated for her. Elizabeth would later say that Garbo taught her that privacy wasn't just something you protected, it was something you created, claimed a longtime member of Taylor's household staff, that there could be parts of yourself you never shared with the world. While neither woman ever publicly confirmed the relationship, the persistence of accounts from multiple credible sources suggests that this connection, however brief, represented a significant moment in Taylor's emotional and sexual development. It established a pattern that would continue throughout her life, of seeking authentic connection beyond the boundaries of convention, regardless of gender.
Hello, Mr. Harris.
The rivals embrace Marilyn Monroe. Throughout the 1950s, the Hollywood press manufactured a rivalry between Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, casting them as opposing archetypes of feminine allure. Monroe was the blonde bombshell, the sex symbol whose overt sensuality masked her intelligence. Taylor was the dark-haired classic beauty, the lady whose refined elegance concealed her smoldering passions. The studios encouraged this perceived competition, understanding that nothing sold tickets like the suggestion of animosity between two of the screen's most desirable women. They were rivals in public. In private, they were wrapped around each other, claimed a former makeup artist who worked with both women during this era. The public saw what the studios wanted them to see, two women competing for the same spotlight. The reality was far more complex and, frankly, far more interesting. According to multiple Hollywood historians and insiders, Taylor and Monroe shared more than just the burden of overwhelming fame and objectification. They allegedly shared a brief but intense, intimate relationship that both women took great pains to keep hidden from the public eye. Marilyn was the only person who ever made Elizabeth blush, revealed a longtime member of Taylor's household staff. And I saw Elizabeth through 3 husbands during my time with her. She was never easily flustered, except when Marilyn would call. Then she'd become like a schoolgirl, all nervous energy and excitement. Their connection reportedly began at a private party in 1955, when both women were at the height of their fame. According to those familiar with the event, Taylor and Monroe, who had previously maintained a cordial but distant relationship in public, found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the gathering, away from the constant observation that characterized their public lives. Both deeply insecure, both over-sexualized, and both drawn to forbidden relationships, noted celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. They recognized something in each other that few others could understand, the peculiar isolation of being desired by millions, but truly known by almost no one. What made the alleged relationship particularly poignant was how it contradicted the studio-manufactured rivalry. While the press pitted them against each other as competitors, Taylor and Monroe supposedly found in each other a rare understanding and acceptance that their public lives rarely allowed. Elizabeth was fascinated by Marilyn's vulnerability, by the contrast between her public image and her private self. explained a former assistant to Monroe, and Marilyn was drawn to Elizabeth's strength, her ability to command respect in an industry that had only ever asked Marilyn to be decorative. Their encounters were reportedly few, but meaningful, arranged with elaborate secrecy given the career-ending potential of such a relationship becoming public in the deeply homophobic 1950s. According to multiple sources, they would meet at private homes belonging to trusted friends, always arriving and departing separately to avoid any suggestion of connection beyond casual professional acquaintance. There was genuine tenderness between them, claimed the former makeup artist. Not just physical attraction, though that was certainly part of it, but a real emotional intimacy. They shared things with each other they couldn't tell anyone else, about the pressures of fame, about their troubled marriages, about their doubts and fears and hopes. The relationship allegedly cooled as their lives took different directions. Taylor entering her tumultuous relationship with Eddie Fisher that would lead to her fourth marriage, Monroe becoming increasingly isolated as her psychological struggles intensified. Yet according to those in Taylor's inner circle, she maintained a special tenderness for Monroe throughout her life and was deeply affected by her death in 1962. Elizabeth kept a small framed photo of Marilyn in her private dressing room until the day she died, revealed a longtime household staff member, not displayed prominently. It was tucked away in a drawer she opened daily, but it was always there. She would never speak about it when asked, just smile that sphinx-like smile she had when she wanted to keep something for herself alone. This private connection between two of Hollywood's most iconic women suggests a far more complex reality than the simplistic rivalry narrative promoted by the studios. In each other, Taylor and Monroe allegedly found not competition, but compassion, not jealousy, but genuine understanding, a brief but significant connection that offered both women a rare moment of authenticity in lives largely defined by carefully constructed public images.
So did I.
The Unexpected Triangle, Montgomery Clift's girlfriend. The deep friendship between Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift ranks among Hollywood's most celebrated platonic relationships. After starring together in A Place in the Sun, 1951, they formed a bond so profound that Taylor would later call Clift the closest person to me in the world for many years. Their connection was built on mutual understanding and protection. Taylor accepting Clift's homosexuality at a time when it could have destroyed his career, Clift providing Taylor with friendship untainted by sexual expectation. What remained hidden until years after both had passed was the alleged complexity this friendship briefly took on when it expanded to include a third person, a woman who was romantically involved with Clift as part of his public heterosexual facade. Monty was gay, and Elizabeth was his closest female confidant, explained film historian Robert Anderson. What few people knew was that during a particularly difficult period in Clift's life, when he was maintaining a relationship with a woman as a cover, the boundaries between these relationships allegedly became fluid in ways that surprised all three people involved. According to multiple sources familiar with the situation, the woman, whose identity remains protected by those who know her story, was not simply a beard for Clift, but someone for whom he had genuine affection, if not sexual attraction. Their relationship, while not romantic in the conventional sense, represented a complex emotional partnership during a time when Clift was under intense scrutiny from studios concerned about rumors regarding his sexuality. She wasn't just playing a role, she genuinely cared for Monty, understood his situation, and had created a life partnership with him that worked for both of them. Anderson continued, "It was an arrangement born of necessity, but sustained by real connection." The situation allegedly took an unexpected turn during a period of crisis for Clift, following his devastating 1956 car accident that left him with injuries that would affect him for the rest of his life. Taylor, who had been dining with Clift just before the accident, was among the first to reach the scene and famously crawled into the wreckage to pull teeth fragments from his throat to prevent him from choking. During Clift's long and difficult recovery, Taylor spent considerable time supporting both him and his partner, creating a uniquely intimate triangle as they navigated this traumatic period together. Elizabeth was there almost daily, helping with his care, managing visitors, protecting him from studio pressure. Said a production assistant who worked with Clift during this period, she and Monty's girlfriend became extremely close through this shared purpose of protecting him. That closeness eventually evolved into something more complex. According to those familiar with the situation, what began as emotional intimacy between the two women gradually developed into a brief physical relationship, one that allegedly occurred with Clift's knowledge and apparent blessing. She didn't want to replace Monty. She wanted to understand what he loved, claimed a member of Clift's inner circle. It wasn't about betrayal, but about connection, about finding comfort during an incredibly stressful time when all three were united in their concern for Monty's well-being. The alleged relationship remained extremely private, even within Hollywood's insider circles. Unlike some of Taylor's other rumored relationships with women, this connection seems to have been known to very few people beyond those directly involved. Never confirmed, but multiple studio insiders have hinted at a strange triangle, noted Anderson. What makes this situation particularly fascinating is how it defies simple categorization. It wasn't just about physical attraction, but about the complex emotional bonds between three people navigating extraordinary circumstances together. The relationship reportedly ended naturally as Clift's recovery progressed and the immediate crisis passed, with all three maintaining close connections but returning to their prior relationship dynamics. According to those familiar with the situation, there was no drama or conflict in its conclusion, simply a recognition that it had been a response to specific circumstances rather than a sustainable arrangement. This episode, if the accounts are accurate, reveals yet another dimension of Taylor's approach to intimacy and connection, one that prioritized emotional authenticity over conventional boundaries or expectations. It suggests a woman whose capacity for love and care couldn't be contained within traditional relationship structures, who found ways to express affection and provide support that defied simple categorization. She didn't want to replace Monty. She wanted to understand what he loved. This perspective offers insight not just into this specific situation, but into Taylor's broader approach to relationships throughout her life, an approach characterized by curiosity, emotional openness, and a willingness to follow connections wherever they might lead, regardless of social convention or expectation.
What are you doing here so early, dear? I thought the plastic surgery seminar was in Switzerland.
The staff betrayal, Eddie Fisher's secretary. Elizabeth Taylor's relationship with Eddie Fisher began in scandal. She was widely condemned for stealing him from her friend Debbie Reynolds, and ended in even greater scandal when she left him for Richard Burton. What remained hidden within this very public marital drama was yet another layer of complexity. Taylor's alleged affair with Fisher's young personal secretary during the latter part of their marriage. During her marriage to Fisher, Elizabeth reportedly had an affair with his much younger personal assistant, revealed a former studio publicist who worked closely with the couple. It was the kind of situation that would have created front-page scandals today, but in that era, there were still some secrets the press either didn't know or wouldn't print. According to multiple sources familiar with the situation, the relationship began sometime in 1960. As Taylor's marriage to Fisher was already showing signs of strain, Fisher's personal secretary, a woman in her early 20s described by those who knew her as intelligent, discreet, and striking rather than conventionally beautiful, had become a constant presence in their household, managing Fisher's increasingly complicated schedule as he attempted to balance his performing career with his role as husband to the world's most famous actress. She fell for the girl who took his calls and stopped taking his, noted a former household staff member. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in their circle, but what could Eddie say? He had pursued Elizabeth while married to Debbie. He wasn't in a position to claim any moral high ground when the pattern repeated with his own secretary. What made the situation particularly complex was the power dynamic involved. As Fisher's employee, the young woman was in a vulnerable position professionally, regardless of who initiated the relationship. Yet according to those familiar with the situation, it was Taylor who reportedly pursued the connection, drawn to the secretary's quiet competence and the unassuming intelligence that contrasted with Fisher's increasingly erratic behavior. The woman disappeared from public view shortly after Taylor's split with Fisher, said celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. This wasn't unusual in that era. When scandalous situations arose, studios were extraordinarily efficient at making potential problems vanish, usually with financial settlements tied to ironclad confidentiality agreements. What distinguished this alleged relationship from simple opportunism was its reported emotional intensity. According to those in Taylor's orbit during this period, she developed genuine feelings for the young woman, feelings that complicated her already troubled marriage to Fisher and may have contributed to its accelerated collapse. Tabloid whispers say the affair was intense and emotionally volatile, Henderson continued. By most accounts, it wasn't just physical attraction, but a deeper connection. The secretary apparently offered Elizabeth something she wasn't getting in her marriage: attentiveness, emotional stability, intellectual engagement. Fisher was increasingly consumed by his own insecurities about living in Elizabeth's shadow, while this young woman seemed comfortable in herself despite her relatively modest position. The relationship reportedly continued even as Taylor began work on Cleopatra, where she would soon meet Richard Burton and begin the affair that would finally end her marriage to Fisher. For a brief period, according to those familiar with the situation, Taylor was allegedly involved with both Fisher's secretary and Burton simultaneously, a complicated emotional tangle that reflected her often chaotic personal life during this period. Elizabeth lived her romantic life at a level of complexity most people couldn't imagine, let alone manage, observed a longtime friend of Taylor's. She didn't see relationships in either-or terms. She followed her heart where it led, often in multiple directions simultaneously. When Taylor's relationship with Burton became public, creating the scandal of the decade, the secretary reportedly found herself summarily dismissed from Fisher's employment, no longer needed as his marriage collapsed, and perhaps too risky to keep around given what she had witnessed. According to those familiar with the situation, she received a generous financial settlement in exchange for her silence, and effectively disappeared from the Hollywood scene. She was paid well to vanish and never tell her story, claimed the former publicist. In those days, studios could make people disappear from public view with remarkable efficiency: new name, new city, new life, all arranged and financed, provided you kept your mouth shut about what you'd seen or experienced. This pattern of relationships with staff members would reportedly continue throughout Taylor's life, creating complex situations where professional boundaries blurred with personal intimacy. While potentially problematic from a modern perspective regarding power dynamics, these connections revealed Taylor's tendency to form attachments based on personal chemistry and emotional resonance rather than social status or convention. She fell for the girl who took his calls and stopped taking his. This observation captures the essence of Taylor's approach to relationships throughout her life, following her heart wherever it led, regardless of external expectations or conventional boundaries, creating a romantic history far more complex and nuanced than the public narrative of serial marriages to famous men would suggest.
Now you look here, Leslie. You are my wife, Ms. Jordan Benedict.
The trusted companion, Rock Hudson's best friend. Elizabeth Taylor's friendship with Rock Hudson represented one of Hollywood's most poignant platonic relationships, two extraordinarily beautiful people who shared a profound understanding of the burdens of fame and the necessity of maintaining public facades. Hudson, a closeted gay man forced to project a heterosexual image throughout his career, found in Taylor a trusted ally who accepted him completely. Taylor, perpetually objectified and misunderstood, found in Hudson a friend who valued her for far more than her legendary beauty. What remained largely hidden from public view, however, was Taylor's alleged relationship with a woman who formed the third point in this friendship triangle, a talented costume designer who was among Hudson's closest confidants. Taylor and Rock were famously close, but it's the woman who was always with them that drew whispers, explained film historian Margaret Collins. She was officially known as a costume designer who worked on several of Rock's films, but within their private circle, she was much more than that. She was his emotional support system, his trusted confidant, and eventually, allegedly, Elizabeth's lover as well. According to multiple sources familiar with their relationship, the woman, whose professional contributions to Hollywood costume design were significant in their own right, had been part of Hudson's protective inner circle for years before Taylor entered the picture. As one of the few people with whom Hudson could be completely himself, she occupied a uniquely trusted position in his life. When Taylor and Hudson became close friends during the filming of Giant, 1956, this costume designer was a constant presence, initially serving as a bridge between them, then developing her own independent friendship with Taylor. According to those familiar with the situation, what began as a friendship eventually evolved into something more intimate. She and Elizabeth reportedly shared a travel companion arrangement for several years, noted Collins. In an era when female stars were expected to be perpetually available to male attention, having a female travel companion was actually a practical arrangement that provided both companionship and protection. It allowed Elizabeth to travel with someone she trusted implicitly, who could shield her from unwanted advances and provide emotional support without the complications that came with male escorts. This travel companion arrangement allegedly developed into a romantic relationship that continued intermittently for several years, conducted with extraordinary discretion, given both women's public profiles. According to those familiar with the situation, Hudson was not only aware of the relationship, but supportive of it, seeing in their connection an extension of the trust and affection that defined his own friendships with both women. One ex-assistant claimed, "It wasn't about labels. It was about intimacy on her terms," said Collins. This seems to have been Elizabeth's approach to relationships throughout her life, following authentic connections where they led, without feeling constrained by conventional categories or expectations. What made this relationship particularly significant was its longevity compared to some of Taylor's other alleged relationships with women. While many were brief encounters or short-lived affairs, this connection reportedly continued on and off for several years, creating a stable emotional attachment that paralleled some of her marriages rather than simply complementing them. The relationship allegedly cooled naturally rather than ending in conflict, with both women maintaining a lifelong friendship even after the romantic aspect had concluded. According to those familiar with the situation, there was never any animosity or drama surrounding the shift back to friendship, simply a natural evolution of a connection that had always been based primarily on mutual respect and affection. One of the most telling aspects of this relationship was how it integrated with Elizabeth's public life, observed Collins. Unlike some of her more secretive connections, this woman was openly part of her social circle, photographed with her at events, included in gatherings with other celebrities. The romantic nature of their relationship was carefully concealed, but the woman herself was hiding in plain sight as a close friend and trusted colleague. This pattern of maintaining intimate relationships within her professional circle reflected Taylor's practical approach to navigating the constraints of fame. By developing connections with people who already had legitimate reasons to be in her orbit, she created spaces where privacy was possible even within her very public life. One ex-assistant claimed, "It wasn't about labels, it was about intimacy on her terms." This observation captures the essence of Taylor's approach not just to this specific relationship, but to intimacy throughout her life, prioritizing authentic connection and emotional resonance over conventional categories or social expectations, creating a personal life as complex and multifaceted as the extraordinary woman herself.
You use the face. The flicker of an eye can be a whole sentence. And
the household confidant, her own housekeeper. Throughout Elizabeth Taylor's very public life, with its multiple marriages, health crises, and constant media scrutiny, her homes represented crucial sanctuaries where she could momentarily escape the relentless attention that followed her everywhere else. Within these private spaces, her household staff played roles far more significant than their job titles might suggest, becoming surrogate family members who witnessed the real Elizabeth behind the public image. According to multiple sources familiar with Taylor's household arrangements, one such staff member, a housekeeper employed during the late 1960s, allegedly developed a relationship with Taylor that transcended professional boundaries and became deeply personal, even intimate. Elizabeth reportedly had a live-in housekeeper whom insiders said she was closer to than any husband during a stretch of loneliness, revealed a former member of Taylor's entourage. This wasn't just friendly employer-employee affection. By multiple accounts, it evolved into a genuine romantic relationship that lasted nearly 2 years. The relationship allegedly began during a particularly difficult period in Taylor's life, following her first divorce from Richard Burton in 1974. Having lost the great passion of her life and still recovering from various health problems, Taylor reportedly found herself deeply isolated despite her fame and fortune. According to those familiar with the situation, the housekeeper, described as an attractive woman in her 30s with a quiet dignity and discretion, provided emotional support that gradually evolved into something more intimate. Gifts, private travel, even alleged shared hotel rooms, noted celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. The pattern became obvious to anyone in Elizabeth's inner circle. Though it was kept completely hidden from the public, the woman would accompany Elizabeth on trips, allegedly sharing her suite while officially registered in a separate room. They would spend evenings alone together when Elizabeth declined social invitations. The household staff understood the situation without it ever being explicitly acknowledged. What made this relationship particularly significant was how it reportedly provided Taylor with a rare sense of normalcy and privacy during a period when her life was otherwise defined by extreme public attention and scrutiny. According to those familiar with the situation, the housekeeper represented a connection untainted by fame, fortune, or Hollywood politics. Someone who had no agenda beyond genuine affection. She wasn't just a maid, she was a companion, and the one person who didn't ask for anything she didn't already have, claimed the former entourage member. Unlike the men in Elizabeth's life, who often seemed to want her fame, her money, or the status of being Elizabeth Taylor's husband, this woman apparently wanted nothing beyond the relationship itself that was incredibly precious to Elizabeth after decades of people wanting pieces of her. The relationship reportedly ended when Taylor reconnected with Richard Burton, eventually remarrying him briefly in 1975. According to those familiar with the situation, the housekeeper was let go with a generous severance package and strict confidentiality agreements. After being dismissed, the woman was given a very generous settlement, an NDA, Henderson explained. This was standard practice in Hollywood, paying handsomely for silence about the private lives of stars. The settlement allegedly included a house in a different state, financial security, and legally binding commitments never to discuss her relationship with Taylor. This pattern of relationships with household staff appeared repeatedly throughout Taylor's life. According to multiple biographers and insiders, the unique intimacy created by sharing daily life with someone who sees you at your most vulnerable, without makeup, without public persona, often literally naked, created connections that sometimes transcended professional boundaries. Elizabeth's homes were her only true sanctuaries, observed a longtime friend of Taylor's. The people who shared those spaces with her saw the real woman, not the movie star, not the tabloid figure, but Elizabeth herself, with all her contradictions and complexities. Sometimes those relationships deepened into something more intimate, which isn't surprising given how rarely she experienced genuine privacy with anyone else. What distinguishes these alleged relationships from exploitative situations was their reportedly consensual and mutually beneficial nature. According to those familiar with them, Taylor didn't leverage her power to pressure employees into intimacy, but rather developed connections that evolved naturally, with both parties choosing to cross professional boundaries. She wasn't just a maid, she was a companion, and the one person who didn't ask for anything she didn't already have. This observation captures a key element of Taylor's approach to relationships throughout her life, seeking authentic connection beyond the transactional interactions that often characterized her experiences as a celebrity, finding intimacy with people who wanted her for herself rather than for what she represented or could provide.